Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Talking Brains podcast. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Appreciate that. This is Dr. Stephanie Sarkis, the host of Talking Brains. My website, stephaniesarkis.com. And this is a podcast where we talk about brains and therapy and the mental health issues that affect us. Today, we have Anthony Quaglieri, PhD, with us. He is also a licensed mental health counselor. He's been in practice for over 40 years. To give you an idea how long he's been in practice, I've been in practice for about a little bit over 20 years. My license number's in the 3,000s. His is in the 400s, just to give you an idea of how seasoned he is as a clinician. He has experience with addictions, trauma, sexuality, couples, bereavement. Also, he has a PhD from the Union Institute 1991 in counseling psychology. He's a certified developmental play trainer working with kids for 7 years. He practices solution-focused brief therapies, and especially trained in that, and we do talk about that in the podcast today. Also, he has 10 years of training in psychodrama. And also, he's an LGBTQ trainer, consultant, liaison, and employee assistance director. He is the actor, conductor, and administrator of Living Mirror Playback Theater, and also a board-certified coach. So today we're going to be talking about the anxiety, disillusionment, helplessness that people have been feeling, burnout, particularly since the last election. If you don't know my political affiliation, I'm guessing that maybe you might have seen the USA Today op-ed where I talk about Donald Trump being a gaslighter because of my book Gaslighting. So surprise if you didn't know already. But we talk in the first half of the podcast about solution-focused therapy and what to do with anxiety. We talk about solution-focused therapy questions that are asked. We also talk about a protocol of what to do when you see somebody being harassed. We've seen this happen more and more now because now we carry smartphones with us, that we have had video of people being harassed, and it seems to be happening more and more now, or it's been caught on film more and more now. Also, in the second half, we get a little more political. What to do if you've had increased anxiety again since the elections. We talk about the importance of voting. Tony's got a really good point that we all know someone. We have a friend that tends to not vote, and call that person and tell them that you'll take them to the polls, you'll help them sign up to vote. Any way we can get people to express their right to choose who represents them. So really a treat of a podcast. So the website for Anthony is www.anthonyquaglieri.com. That's ANTHONYQUAGLIERI.com. And I will again repeat that at the end of the podcast. So again, today's podcast is all about anxiety, disillusionment, burnout, particularly since the last election. And I'll just add that even if you have a different political affiliation, and again, you probably guessed I'm a little bit left of center, I think it's important to just listen to this because I think anxiety, of course, impacts everyone. But I think that in particular, even if you're on the right side of center, you may have had some anxiety as well, again, because we're human. And again, also, maybe the election didn't turn out the way you wanted it to either. So we talk a little bit more about that too. So again, first half, we talk more about anxiety in general. Second half, we get a little more political. So again, enjoy the podcast. We do talk about things like we talked about Dr. Moskovitz about some traumatic memories. So we do get into that. And I think you'll find it pretty interesting. So again, Anthony's website is Anthony Quaglieri, ANTHONYQUAGLIERI, and my website, stephaniesarkis.com. And go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Thank you. And I just realized I forgot to add that the way I know Tony is he is also a clinician in Tampa. So we met about, I think, 4 or 5 years ago now. So again, listen and you'll learn a lot. Thanks. Bye. Quaglieri, and tell me, pronounce your last name again because I'm saying it the incorrect way and you have a beautiful last name.
You almost did it right, Quaglieri.
That's it, Quaglieri. So, and Tony and I, we've known each other for a few years now. I had office space in your office in South Tampa. So we're going to talk a little bit about anxiety that we've seen crop up, particularly since things have changed with the government and overall. And we'll try to be as nonpartisan as possible, which is going to be kind of tough. But we're going to talk a little bit about increasing anxiety that people have had since the elections, since things have gotten a little crazy. So, Tony, what have you noticed with your clients as far as anxiety issues and feelings of disillusionment and?
Well, those two things to start.
Okay.
More anxiety, specifically connected with safety concerns, trust, fear of abandonment, like anxiety having to do with helplessness.
Okay.
Yeah.
And tell me about the safety concerns. What are the main concerns regarding that?
Well, some of it has to do with money, because I think one of the things that happens when there's, unrest, which there has been really for the last 2 years, there's been quite a bit of unrest, social unrest, is that people, they hang on, they feel like their money's going to go, and that they're not going to have control over it. So that's part of, it's kind of basic, like Maslow's safety stuff. So on the economic front, that's part of it. Certainly, I think some of the issues with immigration with immigration have created a feeling that even though you may be in a protected class, the whole idea that anybody can come and take your child at any time just kind of seeps into the culture,
Mm-hmm.
and so even people who are not in a protected class can feel worried at that level.
Right, and if we look through history, I mean, that saying about if we don't pay attention to history, don't learn history, it's doomed to repeat itself. We're seeing a lot of the same patterns that we saw, prior to World War II, pitting groups against each other, marginalizing groups, being oppressive towards particular groups. And I have had kids that have worried that their parents are going to be taken away, when in fact the kids, their parents are actually born in the U.S., so kids have a hard time understanding what's going on. I've noticed a lot of that, because how do you explain this to kids in a way that 5 and 6 year olds can understand? Or because I think we live in Florida, I think particularly there's been more of an issue of ICE coming in and taking parents, and you have kids that are friends of those kids or those kids themselves, that they come home and there's nobody there, and the kids whose parents were born here are worried that their parents are going to go away, because the kids don't differentiate between parents.
Right.
So I think that's a big issue too. And we were talking about the Maslow pyramid. If you could explain a little bit for everyone what the Maslow pyramid is, just in case people aren't familiar with it.
Yeah, the Maslow pyramid is at this point it's a quite old concept, but it was revolutionary at the time, and I really can't say when he created a hierarchy of needs. And it was, you could just imagine a pyramid, and that at the bottom of the pyramid, the widest part of the pyramid, were safety, and it was a hierarchy actually of needs, of human needs, of an individual, and I guess of families and groups. And so at the very bottom is safety and security, and as you go up the pyramid, there's less need for it, but there's still a need for it. So there's security, food, and then love and affection, connection with groups, intellectual stimulation, emotional safety, and when you get to the top, there's something that he called self-actualization, which was, I guess, some kind of, would actually be akin these days to really kind of calling it a spiritual connection. Mm-hmm. So that once you get all of these other, if you think of the pyramid, the base of it being security and safety, that once you have all those things, identification with groups and support, then you can move towards self-actualization, which is a more kind of solid sense of who you are.
Yeah, and I worked with someone when I was doing my training that I think is one of the true self-actualized people, and I noticed that he really knew his craft, but also was very open to learning, and knew that he didn't know everything, and was accepting of all people. He had that unconditional positive regard, that Rogerian thing, and really knew his stuff, but again, also was a very humble person, and that's the person I think of when I think of embodiment of self-actualization. What that means, he was being his best self.
Right.
And
right.
and I think those people can be kind of rare, because I think that I don't want people to feel like they have to be self-actualized, because I think it takes a while to achieve that. But you kind of know it when you see it. Those are the people that really have their act together. And they do experience anxiety, but they also know it's anxiety, and they know that it's temporary. And they also are able to come up with action plans. But right. Maslow's idea too was that if you're not meeting that bottom of the pyramid, that safety security piece, then it's going to be hard to do all the other building blocks too.
Right. And that's really part. I mean, that's part of how our brain works too. Is that we can't really attend to higher functions. If you're hungry and you don't know how to live, and you're exposed to the elements, or if you don't have love and affection and a sense of community and support, then you can't manage the tasks that it takes, like to go to school and to get a job and a livelihood, stuff like that. So that's the kind of beauty, I think, of that pyramid, is that the understanding that, and I like what you said about self-actualization, is that it's not a place to get to, it's a place to reach toward. And that people that are more self-actualized are people that understand they have limitations. As you said, be aware of them.
Right, and openly also, if they've messed up, that they openly apologize and then make amends or work on improving it. They don't have a lot of psychological defenses.
Right.
If they do, they label them and they say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I was projecting that," and they know their stuff. And they don't necessarily have to be mental health clinicians by any means. It can be anyone that's been able to kind of own their stuff, I think, and be genuine in expressing how they're feeling, but also being empathic and listening to the other person, and really listening. So that's a little bit about self-actualization. And I think, you touched on, especially the hunger. That's why hunger is such a big issue, is that if you're a kid that's hungry every day, it's really hard to focus at school. It's really hard to make those social connections when you're constantly starving. So that's one of the reasons why hunger has become such a big issue. And again, we have people that are feeling like they're one step away from losing everything right now.
Yes.
And it's very hard to function that way.
Yes.
A lot of people losing sleep. I've seen people with an increased rate of gastrointestinal issues, like irritable bowel syndrome. I've had people with increased ulcers, kids with increased ulcers, and it's a lot of unknowns.
Right, and that was kind of your original question to me, was how has the current social political climate affected people? And just what you said, I mean, it's affecting bodies. It affects relationships, affects our bodies, affects relationships, our connections, our sense of identity with what groups do I belong to. Now we're so fractionalized. I think I just made up a word. And tribalism, I think, is
right.
Our buzzword. That identifying with a group is good, but then you also don't get to really understand what other people who are not in your tribe, where they're coming from.
Right, it becomes a classic us versus them.
Right.
Instead of us all being unified.
Yeah, and that increases anxiety. On the one hand, it's a desire to feel protected because you're part of now this other group, but then also you have a sense of being kind of under attack by the opposite group. So it's, tribalism is not, it's primitive. It's not a good thing.
Right. We're kind of going backwards in our thinking about people, again, instead of having that unified front. And if you're a person of color, a person that's been marginalized, now we have people calling 911 on people just for their race.
Exactly.
And that I think has been present before, but I think now it's almost become socially acceptable for people in some groups, which is terrifying. And you have people that are going out in public now and worried about if they're going to come home, if they're going to get arrested, right. and I think that it's again that racism has always been there, but I think that now it's become more overt rather
right.
than covert.
Right. And a point I want to make just in terms of our jobs in therapy, that I don't know about your practice, but my practice, is mainly white people of means,
mm-hmm.
And it's very interesting how the fear, like when the Kavanaugh hearings were happening, there was a lot of finger pointing, of course, but there was the notion that anybody could blame anybody about anything at any time came up.
Mm-hmm.
And, even though we know this, it's true that anybody can blame anybody, but the fact that it was kind of like front and center on television, that everybody's fear, like lots of people's fear about, oh my God, I can be blamed for anything by anybody. That adds really deeply to anxiety and sense of security, even if you didn't do anything wrong.
Oh, absolutely, and that's another fear, is being accused of something, or like in the case of people calling 911 because of someone's race, and also the idea that you could be the victim of abuse and be basically harassed on a national level. Brought up a lot of trauma issues for people, and their experiences of not being believed, or being told, well, this person's of higher social standing or whatever, so you must be mistaken. I had people that had a previous abuse history that they started having nightmares, flashbacks, because it really opened up that feeling of helplessness. Especially seeing Dr. Ford testifying and going through their own experiences with the legal system.
Right. I noticed a lot of that too, and I also had people calling who had been to see me, a long time back, calling, kind of because they got triggered by some of the stuff that they saw around Dr. Ford's. How unfortunate that was.
Right, and I made sure that I told people that if you feel like you need to watch this, watch it in small bites, because watching the entire thing, which I haven't been able to do, really brings up a lot of anxiety and trauma issues, and that's what I mean by triggered, is it can cause you to open up that file of your trauma that maybe has been pushed in the back for a while or has never been opened, And I also had people talk about that they're starting to recall now that they may have been abused and they didn't really consider it abuse until they started talking about it. Like one person saying, "Well, I was drinking, so I didn't really think that it was their fault because I put myself in that position." And they were now realizing that, wait a second, drunk or not, this person should not have assaulted me. And so in that way, I think it's bringing to light people's feelings of validation that this person did something, this egregious harm to you, and they are 100% responsible for that. So I think it is helping in that regard, that people are less likely to blame themselves, the people I've been working with. Yeah. So there's that's come from it. I think people are more politically active too.
Right. Yeah, well, that's right. If you think about the Anita Hill hearings and what going on at that time and how little discussion there really was about it. There was discussion, but there wasn't as wide, really social upheaval and conversations and debate.
We didn't have social media either.
No, and we didn't have social media, so now you're right. So now what I think probably what's happening is, as a result, besides people getting really triggered about their own histories, is, well, now what can I do? So that really kind of goes back to the helplessness stuff. Is what helplessness can move toward health when people feel like they can do something. So those certainly, an action you can take.
And so let's talk a little bit about that. So if people are feeling this disillusionment and anxiety, or they're experiencing trauma, what are some steps they can take to start healing?
Well, I think that it really kind of depends on what the degree of, and this is in quotes, I want to use this word symptoms, like what's coming up. I mean, if you haven't been in therapy and you become aware of past traumas that you haven't really worked through, or that you're just now becoming conscious of, get a call a therapist. If it's something that is coming back, and or you're feeling general feelings of helplessness, then I think that it would be good to join some kind of group, or join either a political group or some kind of social outlet, or some kind of volunteer organization where you're surrounded by people who can talk with, and then you can actually do something. So I think really, some of the theme here is that actually doing stuff, as opposed to talking about it or taking action in some way, and opening up to people that you haven't opened up to before.
Right. It's even when it's hard, because when you feel that level of anxiety or you're experiencing trauma, one of the last things people want to do is talk about with other people. But the tricky thing is that that's what really helps. Joining a grassroots organization, like you said, a political group, finding that you're not the only one that's experiencing this is very validating. That concept of universality, that you're not the only one.
Right.
And again, that feeling of helplessness lends itself to being kind of vulnerable to more trauma.
Right. Exactly. I'm vulnerable. I mean, helplessness and isolation. So isolation will make you vulnerable to more trauma.
Right.
So it's isolation is really poisonous.
And what would you say to somebody that comes to you and says, I'd like to get active, but the way I'm feeling right now, I just want to hide? What were some suggestions you would have for them to be able to maybe take that first step and get active?
Well, I think I would ask them what they have been part of in the past, if they've ever gotten active before in anything, even if it was college, if it was a kind of a drama class or something, then I kind of mine. What I would do is kind of mine what they have been part of in the past, and then ask them to remember that and what it felt like, and see if it maybe to help them kind of evoke some of the good feelings about things that they had been part of in the past. I very rarely would say, well, why don't you try this and why don't you try that? Because as you know, it's always helpful to start where the person is, and part B of that would be to ask them what they are already doing, because you'd be surprised if even people who are isolated, you can ask them, well, what are you part of right now? And even if it's your family, what do you belong to? Well, I belong to a church. I belong to a church. Okay. So you find out where they are already active, and then ask them what the next step would be.
So it's focusing on the strengths.
Right.
And that's part of solution-focused therapy, which you and I both practice, in addition to other forms of therapy. And maybe we could touch a little bit on that for people that aren't aware of what that is. Solution-focused is looking at what's going well so we can increase that. And sometimes the other things kind of fall into place. That's a real quick summary of it. Go ahead.
Yeah, that was a great summary.
Oh, good. Thank you for your positive reinforcement. I appreciate that.
You already do. So there it is.
And you're very solution focused at kind of complimenting me on that. So we're on a roll.
It's really amazing. Since I've kind of started to work with solution focused stuff, that it's very easy to ask somebody, well, what are you already doing that's working? It's a great question.
Mm-hmm. And it's something that people aren't usually asked.
No, they're not. No. I mean, even if you think about a doctor, the old cliche of you walking in and the doctor says, what seems to be the problem?
Mm-hmm.
Think about what it would be like if you went to the doctor and he said or she said to you, what have you done since I've seen you last that has helped your condition? And that were the first question.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been taking my medication, and I went to physical therapy. So then the patient would be empowered. So that's the kind of foundation, really, of solution focused. Is what are your strengths? What have you done in the past? What are you already doing? And what's the next step you can take to get a little bit more functional in the direction that you want to be going? Mm-hmm. And what is your preferred future? What would you like? What would you like when this therapy is over? What's your life going to be like?
Right, exactly. The magic question. How would you be if things were well? Or you wake up tomorrow morning and things were exactly how you wanted them to be. What would it be like?
Right.
And that's something I think that again, not a lot of people are asked, because we tend to ask, what's wrong, or what do you need help with? And people have felt helpless, now for, especially if you're already prone to anxiety. I think the last couple of years have really increased it. So you really haven't had a chance to sit back and go, hey, I have been working really hard at this, or I do have strength, and let me figure out how to channel that. And then we become the people that help them channel it,
right.
Which is a really neat process to watch.
It is a neat process, yes. Yeah.
And I think we're really, really fortunate to be able to witness that. And I think also when we create goals, I think it really points people in a direction that the anxiety is just kind of on the wayside. But when they keep focused on the goal, the anxiety kind of almost takes care of itself, and that it's okay to not feel okay sometimes.
Right.
Because I know sometimes when I've worked with people, they have a lot of pressure on themselves that, I'm not feeling good and I should be feeling good because I don't have it as bad as so-and-so does. And I'll say, but your issues are still valid.
Right.
And right. I see that a lot of the, it could be worse because I'm this or I'm that and I have these privileges. And I say, but you're still suffering. So let's
right.
figure out how to look at what's going well for you. And
right.
And I think sometimes that might be misinterpreted as we're not looking at the issue, but we actually are. We're just looking at it through kind of a different lens.
Right. Yeah, I like that metaphor. Yeah, that we're not ignoring the issue, and it certainly is not the idea is to not deny the person's pain, but also help them to find what the next step is to feeling better. And also, I think what you said was great. Is it just helping them with the perspective that they don't always feel this bad.
Mm-hmm.
And a more classic solution-focused question, which I think is in some ways ludicrous, but it's been very helpful when I've used it. Why don't you think you feel worse? And
that's powerful.
That's very powerful. How did you get to this office today? And you're not being disingenuous. It's like, how do you think you got here today? Well, I made this decision, I made that decision, and I made this decision. So that's extremely helpful in helping people to acknowledge what they already are able to do on their own.
Oh, absolutely. I really like that. So why don't you think you feel worse?
Yeah. Be prepared for very strange looks.
So as I preface it with, I'm going to ask you a weird question.
Yes,
So-
yes. I always say that I'm going to ask you a very strange question right now. Why don't you think you feel worse? And
Right, because people have been to therapy before and it wasn't solution focused, or their ideas of therapy that they've seen in TV or movies or talking with someone, they don't really expect you to ask them that
no,
or how things would be if they were well.
right, right, right.
But
Because then,
okay,
that's a good piece too. I mean, you always kind of follow it up with, well, if, when you feel, not if you feel, but when you feel better, who's going to notice? Who's the first person that's going to notice that you're feeling better? And then you can connect it to somebody else in their life. So again, it pulls them toward the future.
and it's a lot less isolating when they know that there's someone that's going to notice too. It brings to the forefront that you are not completely alone. And I really like your idea of stating that it's not if you feel better, it's when you feel better. So
Right.
also giving that subconscious idea of you are going to feel better.
Right, right.
And that frees a lot of people, knowing that there are times where they felt better and they can get back there.
Right, right.
And that you don't have to do anything you don't want to do, too.
Right, right.
And
Yeah,
that...
it's all up,
Mhm.
yeah, it's all up to you. Right.
Right, and if you don't want to do anything right now, that's okay. If you want to do something, that's okay, too. And I think that's freeing for people, too. A lot of people that do the should, could, would, and that gets into REBT, Rational Motive Behavior Therapy stuff. But
Yeah.
I think giving people options is very freeing, especially when you feel so stuck that you don't feel like you have options. And that's a really yucky feeling to have.
Right.
That's my clinical term, yucky.
I like it. That's people can identify with that word. I got news. Like almost, it's a word from childhood, and you really know when something's yucky, and it's a particular form of feeling bad.
And I don't know if you remember Mr. Yuck. I don't know if we had the sticker Mr. Yuck for the Poison Control Center, and he had this really yucky face. Like he just tastes so bad. And so I think for people of, they're my age and maybe older, they remember that face. And I think that yucky kind of, it's very descriptive to a lot of people.
Yeah, I've never seen yuck. Is it a face of disgust?
Yeah, it's like a tasting something bad, and there's an emoji that looks a lot like it, but it was green, and we had it on the medicine cabinet at home, and it had like Mr. Yuck Poison Control Center and with the phone number on it, and I remember that sticker very vividly. And I've talked with people before; they're like, "Oh yeah, like Mr. Yuck," and I'm thinking, I don't think Mr. Yuck's around anymore. I don't know.
Well, I like the metaphor, the poison. I don't like it, but I mean the metaphor of poison, and really to kind of get back to just how he opens with, what's poisoning in our culture right now. And, tribalism is poisoning, and really, I think that that's what people feel bad from. Is kind of sense of such little care for people's lives when we see this kind of stuff, and we see it happen, and we've been happening in other countries for such a long time. But stuff that's happening here that really feels like what we see, the kind of suffering in other countries and poisons. It makes us feel sick. And as you said, it kind of starts to trigger stuff that then brings people to therapy, to help, and to self-help.
And I think people tend to have a strong sense of justice, and I think that's coming out even more, which I think has been a positive too. That they've reached a limit of, I need to do something, and before things were pretty much okay for them. I mean, I know I took the last 8 years for granted. Because everything was pretty normal. So I think that now people are again like being kind of driven to do things like joining groups and also speaking out more, like speaking out when they see injustice. When before, I think it's kind of like before 9/11, if you saw somebody acting up on a plane, you kind of laid low and
Right.
didn't do. You just want to be hidden. But now, when someone acts out on a plane, people take them down because our idea, our paradigm has shifted. And I think that's one of the things that's happened here now too. Currently, is that people that may have, when they see someone being spoken to in a rude way, or even more than rude, would kind of shirk back a little bit and hide, because that's what we kind of think is that's what we do, is we don't get involved. But I think now people are much more likely to take out their phone and start recording or start intervening. There was a video of a woman that was harassing two women at a store for speaking Spanish, and there was a woman that came up and basically got between them and said, "You are not going to talk to these people this way." And she didn't say these people, that sounds bad too, but she said, you have no business doing this to them. And I think people that before may have not have taken that step, I think now they do. And that's part of that tuning into, wow, you stood up to that person. How great is that you were able to summon that strength to do that? So that must mean that you're strong in other areas too.
Right.
Because that takes a lot to go against those social norms. But a lot of social norms have been broken too.
Yeah, that's right. And I really like that you brought that up, because I recently got involved with a group that was doing something called bystander training, and it's part of the nonviolent communications group. There's a larger national group that work with nonviolent communications, and learning how to confront people nonviolently. But the bystander training has to do with specifically training people, and everyday people, what to do if you see an injustice being, what to do and what to not do, how to diffuse the situation, and how to know how to get the victim out of the situation easily. And it's pretty good. It's a kind of a handful of principles, but when done in a group and with role playing and stuff like that, it's really quite good. So this is what, I think, what to kind of jump off of what you're saying, that this is something we never would have thought of 10 years ago. That we have to train people about what to do when they see an assault happening. But it's a great idea.
Oh, yeah. Are there some principles, like a few of them, that you could speak about right now, the bystander training? Like what's one of the principles that people can kind of take away if they're listening to this about bystander?
Well, that you don't escalate, you de-escalate. So you don't start yelling at the perpetrator. I mean, that's common sense. But some people, it's hard. So if you see something awful happening, if you see something becoming verbally abused, your first reaction is to get angry.
Right. Right.
And then your next thing, if you're going to take action, is to start screaming at the perpetrator. But you don't start screaming at the perpetrator. You go over to the victim and you stand behind the victim and don't say anything. That was one of the things.
Oh, really? Huh.
Yeah. You just stand behind the victim, or you say to the victim, "Is it okay if I put my hand on your shoulder?"
Okay.
I'm a friend, and so that was one.
Because my first reaction is, like, my sense of justice. I would be really enraged, and I would probably start saying something to the perpetrator. Probably partly because I'm mad, and part of it is also to get their focus off the victim. But that makes a lot of sense, to stand with the victim and acknowledge them by touching them.
Right.
Because you're trying to de-escalate the perpetrator, and that's got to be tricky doing that, especially because I have that strong sense of justice, as a lot of people do. But so you stand behind the victim, you don't do anything, but you say, "Can I put my hand on your shoulder?"
Yeah, is it okay if I just stand here with you? I'd see what's going on, and or it's just to kind of get the victim out of there.
Right.
Just to kind of let's just walk this way. And there were some other things that I really would need it in front of me. But they were interventions with the perpetrator to distract the perpetrator, to distract the perpetrator so that you can get the victim really out of the scene, out of the situation.
And I think that's an important thing to know, is getting the victim away from the perpetrator, not bringing justice to the perpetrator. That's the main focus.
And shaming them, right?
Get the person out of there.
which is what you want to do, is you want to shame the perpetrator so they run away. That's what happens
Right.
on television. Happens on television in the movies.
Oh, where you'd shame them and they go away? Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
And the person would always say something really pithy to the perpetrator, and the perpetrator would see the wrongs of his behavior or whatever it is in the movies. Yeah.
Right.
Right. But the thing in bystander training is get the victim out.
Right. Protect the victim and get the victim out and support them.
Whether that's walking away, or do they also recommend, if you have a car, to see if you can get the person in the car and take them to a different location? Or
it was about because what happens is that the victim sometimes, a lot of times, what the victim will happen with the victim is that they'll move toward the perpetrator and fight back, or they'll freeze like a deer in the headlights. So you really kind of, with the bystander training, you really do working more with the victim than you are with the perpetrator, because the perpetrator is out of control and irrational, and there's not much to.
And as part of the touching this sense of validation, also, I hear you and I see what's happening.
Yeah,
and you're not alone.
You're not alone. Yeah, you're not alone.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how can people do that training? You said that you've participated in it.
Yeah, I participated in it as a part of my playback theater stuff, but there are groups. I mean, they do them on campus too a lot, but there are groups. If you look up bystander training, you can find groups that do it, and you can read about it.
And do they also recommend recording with your phone? Because I know that's how a lot of this has come out, is videos people have posted about injustices. Is that one of the things they address, whether that's a good idea or not? Because I'm wondering, does that irritate the perpetrator? Or
if they were, I wasn't around for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I think it's in a positive. It's bringing the light stuff that I think if I identify as white, and so it's stuff that I had kind of this cushion around me that I wasn't fully aware of how bad it was. And
right.
So I think seeing the video brings that to life, that what people go through on a daily basis. So right. I think there is power in recording it, but I could also see too that recording it can instigate a perpetrator.
Yeah, I think they called that document. Now that it's coming to me, there were like delaying. Wait, I'm looking it up now. I'm finding my notes. Okay, so here we go. So directing. There were 5 Ds, and the first one was directing, which was and that was kind of directly intervening, and that had to do with helping. Some tactics having to do with naming what's going on, like this is racist, this is homophobic, this is not appropriate in this place right now. Just saying it out loud without being aggressive. And then distracting, that was the second. Talk about something random. Do something distracting. Sing. And then the third one was delegating, and that had to do finding resources. If there's a resource, if there's a manager or a policeman or some kind of authority around. And then the fourth D was delaying, and that was tactics of delay were about having them. It was a kind of an offshoot of distracting, where you would kind of delay stuff until you could get help. If you needed one, or if you needed to do something. And then the documentation. The delaying was helping, checking in with the person who's being harassed and supporting them.
So what's the delaying again?
The delaying was asking it was really more working with the victim and asking that they're okay, tell them you're sorry that it happened to them, ask them if there's any way you can support them. Can I call anybody for you? Offer to accompany them to a destination. Share a resource with them, and if you documented the incident, see if you can get their number or their email address and send them the film, the video.
Yeah, also important if they're going to have a court case.
Right.
That they're able to get a hold of you and have the video.
Right.
Yeah. Right. So it's distracting, delegating, delaying, documentation. Well, actually, it's directing. So let me say that again. So it's directing, distracting, delegating, delaying, and then documentation.
Right.
Okay. So those are things people can do if they see an injustice happening, and I think that's really an important thing too, is to call it what it is.
Yeah. Well, that's the directing piece. Is that say this is not not appropriate conversation, and it's not appropriate for this place right now, and just kind of acting with authority. So that's what I remember about it more than anything, is that you can act like an authority without being aggressive.
Right.
It's just putting your best foot forward.
Right. Assertive, that the idea of passive, assertive, and aggressive, that being assertive, you can tell someone this is not okay without getting in their face. Or making steps towards them, because that person, the perpetrator's already amped up with adrenaline. So, but if you just call it what it is, I think that also speaks truth to the evil that's going on, and I think that gives the evil less power.
Yeah, you're just firm, clear, and concise.
Right, and I'm the delegating part too. I was reading that when you are seeking someone to call 911, or you're seeking someone to do something, to specifically call out that person, even describe what they're wearing. Like you say, hey, you wearing that red shirt, or you wearing that hat, go do this. And that when you do that, the person's much more likely to do it, because that bystander phenomenon where people feel overwhelmed by how much is going on, that you need to identify a specific person to go do something.
Yeah, precisely.
So I think that's an important key too. I think that's a really, those are really valuable skills for people to know, especially because we're seeing this more and more now, where people are being mistreated, publicly. That idea of bystander training. So you're saying that people can look that up. It's a program. You said sometimes it's on campuses, sometimes in your playback theater, that you do part of that in playback theater, and I think that's a really good set of skills for people to know, because again, this is something that maybe you haven't encountered before, where you saw someone in public being victimized. So really good to know. And again, that's that part of feeling less helpless, because you know that you now have some tools. If you see this happening, you can do something about it.
Right.
And yeah. Oh, go ahead.
Bystander training. If you just kind of searched for that when you get to the internet, and there's a program called Hollaback, like holler back.
Like the Gwen Stefani song. HOLLABACK?
HOLLABACK.
Yep.
It's a Hollaback website that's got a lot of very good ideas, and these 5 Ds, and what to do and what not to do.
Well, that's a great idea. I didn't even know that was available. I'm definitely going to tell people about that.
And they're doing it, of course, up north and out west. It's pretty standard on campuses.
Okay.
And I think it's going to be more so in the general culture, because more of that is happening because people feel like more, unfortunately, people are getting conscious messages that it's okay to do this.
Right. Yeah. I think that's the frightening part, is that people are feeling like this is now socially acceptable to do this.
Right. Yeah. Right. And when you see, when you can turn the television on and see reporters getting, disrespected, it's that
or killed.
Yeah. That's right. It gives there's just more permission in the culture to be verbally violent.
Right. And again, the covert is becoming overt. And I think I read it on Twitter, somebody had a really good quote. I think it was actually from someone in Nazi Germany that said, the same thing as replaying that, 1/3 of the people are attacking 1/3 of the people, and the other 1/3 of the people are kind of standing there not knowing what to do or being silently complicit in it. And I think that was a really good point, is that we need to make sure that if you are the 1/3 that's either not attacking or not being the victim of the attack, that you need to do something about it.
Right.
And that, again, the social norms are changing. And maybe we'll get back to that place where people feel safer. I hope that's sooner rather than later. I think it's also important that people get out and vote. And that's a really important way to feel empowered, is
Yes.
to go out and vote for people that do not have racist agendas, that stand for equality of people. Because I tell people, even if you think you're quote unquote safe, you never know when they're going to come after you. And we're finding that more and more, that people that thought they were in a quote unquote safe group are not. So it's really important that we elect people in that respect all people.
Right. That's what I was saying earlier. That the idea that people are privileged, or privilege is all relative. Like you're privileged, so you're not. You're
Right.
privileged, and the group that's above you thinks that you're not privileged anymore. And that could happen all the time, So I did want to say one thing about voting that kind of came to me yesterday, and that is that I got somebody to vote. I mean, I called somebody who I knew. I don't know what happened. I just thought about this. But you know what? This is a person that I'm not sure would vote. And I called her, and I said, and I knew she was going out of town. I said, "What are you going to do about voting?" And she said, "Oh, I don't know." She just kind of started to. She was not going to vote. So I said, "You know what? I'm going to look up early voting in your state. I'm going to send you information right now. I want you to fill it out. I want you to go do it. Just go do it." And she did it. She voted. She brought her husband, and she voted yesterday. And I thought, look at that.
Oh, wonderful. And you called her, and I think that's the important thing, is that a lot of people aren't calling people or just texting people. But I think when we call people, you have a lot more influence and a lot more conversation rather than just texting somebody going, "Did you make sure to vote?" And then you went the extra step of saying, "Hey, here's how you register. Here's how you go do early voting." And a lot of people think that their vote doesn't count, but it does. I mean, we both lived here during the 2000 presidential election, where it got down to a handful of votes, and we can do another whole podcast about that. But but your vote does count. And that was part of the Russian influence in the 2016 election, was that they were trying to get people to not vote. And then we have voter disenfranchisement, and we have voter suppression, which I think we also need to speak out at. I know in Florida that we had, I think that, the governor was trying to really restrict when the polls were open, and that was found to be unconstitutional, because people that work standard hours, like 9 to 5, work night shift, are more likely to vote Democrat. And so there's been a lot of keeping polls closed. I know I even had the experience of going to the polling place in Palm Beach County and told that I could not vote because I wasn't on the rolls. And I had my ID card with me and my voter card. And I had to wait for a half hour to get a supervisor to come up to basically let me vote. And I told them, I go, I'll wait as long as it takes. And I thought, well, at least I took the afternoon off. But, not a lot of people could sit there and wait for a half hour to get someone to allow you to vote.
Yeah, if you had a kid to pick up at daycare, you wouldn't wait.
Right. And it's not the poll people. It's not the people running the polls' fault, because I literally was not on the rolls. I think it goes higher than that, and that's where, again, we need to speak out when we feel like people are not being allowed to vote, or it's being made difficult. I think it should be a national holiday, voting, and I know they do that in several countries. Or even the mail-in votes. Now they require 2 stamps for that. Well, how many people have stamps hanging out in their desk drawers anymore? Not a lot of people, because a lot of stuff's gone all non-postage, right? It's all electronic. So, and they said in this little insert, put 2 stamps on there. Well, if you put 1 stamp on there, it's not getting there. Like last year's ballot, you could put 1 stamp on, but we had a whole bunch of referendums this year. So, it's just stuff like that, I think, that makes it tricky. And one more thing about Florida voting is what I was reading is that in the sheet it says if they think that your signature doesn't match the signature that they have on file, they can totally disregard your ballot.
Right.
And you don't hear about it.
Yeah, you won't know that. Yeah.
So I think when we look at candidates, we have to look at candidates that honor the voting process and making it easier for people to be heard.
Right. And that's something you can do is, kind of work to eliminate voter suppression and stuff like that. I mean, so there really are so many things that people can do. But I wanted to just kind of reiterate that I came up with this theory yesterday that everybody knows one person that might not vote. Everybody knows one person. You think because you vote and you would never question that you would vote, but you thought about it, that you do know one person, at least one person, and if everybody kind of decided they were going to contact that person and make sure, it would make a very big difference.
Right, and if it's drive them to the polls, you drive them to the polls. I know that at this point, I know in some states you may not be able to register, but you can make sure that they're registered for the next election, or have them be active in another way. But yeah, I think and again, calling people helps instead of just texting them. Calling them and do it in a non-punitive way, because when people have grown up feeling like they don't have a lot of power, voting is one of those things where a lot of people feel like they don't really have much of a say, and it doesn't matter. And it's important to let them know that your vote does matter, and it can flip. And we're going to have a lot of close elections this year, and it can flip things one way or the other. So. So you're right. Everybody knows at least one person who might not vote. So contact them and see what you can do and tell them that their vote counts. And again, like you said, like you went the extra mile of finding out where they could vote at. So we need to do that stuff. And Uber is also offering free rides to the polls this year, which is pretty neat. So you can just call up Uber and they will take you to the polls at no charge. I think it's just on voting day. I'll have to look that up. But that's a pretty neat thing too. So
I'm an Uber driver for a day, so I can do that.
Yeah, really, that'd be a great idea.
Yeah.
No, that's actually a really good idea. I bet there are other people who do that. They would be an Uber driver just for a day, so they could get people to polls. And I'm kind of like, I don't care what way you vote, just go to the polls. Exercise your right that people in so many countries don't have a right to do.
Right.
And that even gets. Oh, go ahead.
Something that could be taken away from us.
Right. And in the case of felons, it has been taken away. And that's one of the things we're voting on this year is to restore voting rights to felons, because we're one of the last states to not have voting rights restored to felons once they serve their time.
Right.
And the exceptions to that are murder, or I forget what the other one was, but yeah, you have people who have served their time that aren't able to vote, and Florida's one of the last states. So that's, again, then we're looking at voter suppression. So, I'm probably gonna start getting political, so I'll scale it back a little bit.
You and I got charged up about the things that we're passionate about, but the message you even started out with was, what can you do about your anxiety? What can you feel like you're in charge of yourself and in charge of your body and in charge of your life? And so to us, to you and me right this minute, we're very passionate about voting. We feel like that we have to do that in order to feel like we're preserving our own personal way of life.
Right, our own democracy. Yeah. And I think even if you have an anonymous Twitter account and you post, hey, I've experienced this and this is what I've gone through, that's a way of taking action. I don't think you have to necessarily say who you are, because I know some people are in the situation where they don't want their name attached to their experiences for various reasons. Which I respect that, and say that you can still have your voice heard. You can do a blog, talking about it without giving your name. Now people can find out who you are, but make yourself heard. And if you're on the Nextdoor app, that's somewhere it connects you to people in your neighborhood. I know that there have been people on the Nextdoor app that are forming groups to talk about different voting issues and how to combat voter suppression. So that's another place you can go. That's the beauty of social media now, is that you can find groups Like on meetup.com, you can find groups for your political affiliation that work on those particular issues. Right. So that's another way that you can feel less helpless about what's going on.
That's right. And if you feel depressed or powerless or anxious, call up a friend and say, hey, let's go to this meeting.
Right.
I found this. Let's go.
Or if you just say, you know what, I just need you to listen to me for a little bit and not judge and not give me a response. I just need to vent about something. And I think that's perfectly okay to do too. I think that's giving yourself power to say what you need.
Yeah. So it's all about empowerment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really is. And I think also that sometimes I work with people that it's 0 or 100 and they say, well, if I can't get this person elected, then what's the point? And what I say is, you know, even baby steps that you make change with, it's still change.
Mm-hmm.
That, yeah, maybe your guy doesn't get elected or girl doesn't get elected, but that doesn't mean you didn't cause someone to think about things differently, or that you started thinking about things differently. And I think that's what counts. It's you know, the classic baby steps thing we tell people in therapy.
Yeah. What's the next small step you could make?
Right. Well, in wrapping up, what's a thought that you want to leave listeners with today about what we've been talking about? I know we've talked about a lot of stuff, but what's something that you'd like to leave with people?
Well, that something that we haven't talked about that I think is good, that exposure to the media, exposure to the news, and exposure to bad news, and exposure to we talked a little bit about it when we about the Kavanaugh hearings, that it's really important to titrate that to yourself, that you don't, if you have anxiety about the world and about the current social situation and political situation and the way that it might affect you, that it's good to be informed, get your headlines, and if you find that you get more upset the more you read and you digest. Sometimes there's a point in a diminishing returns where
mm-hmm.
you've gotten all the information that you need, and now is picking at a scab, and that's the time to get up and turn it off and go do something, go meditate.
Right, and that you can still be informed but still take a step back from everything. I use an app called Feedly, Feedly, and you can select what news you want to see, and you can also accept or block certain news sources. So ones that I know that are obviously biased, I will block. And I think that's also that whole hashtag fake news thing, is that trying to undermine credible sources of news. And we need to be careful about that too. But on Feedly, you can say, you know, what topics you want to hear about. You can also, I think there's also apps that you can block certain topics or certain words if they're triggering to you. So I think that it's important to educate ourselves, but also, again, know when it's time to take a break, and that's perfectly acceptable. Because 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, we had a lot less information thrown at us all the time. And studies have found that if you view TV news, the amount of TV news that you watch is directly proportional to an exaggerated view of the crime in your city, county, state, and country. Yeah. So that's another thing to look at too. And I'd also, surround yourself with some good news too, because there's a lot of good stuff going on in the world that I think that we need to expose ourselves to that too. And there was a website called happynews.com, and it's now defunct for whatever reason. That's just too bad. I'm like, oh no, what hope is there when Happy News is down? But it's important to look up positive stuff, and that's one of the things I have on my Feedly news feed, is that I have a section of positive news, because I like to look at how people are changing the world for the better, because it is happening. We do need to acknowledge and do something about the stuff that's not good, but we also need to know that there are kind of our brothers and sisters in change out there that are doing things to make the world a better place.
Right.
And reach out to them and say, hey, how can I get in on that? Or how can I help with that? Well, thank you very much, Tony. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I've enjoyed this talk. Thanks I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, as always, thank you. That concludes another episode of Talking Brains. Thank you to Tony Qualieri, PhD, for his insights. And his website is anthonyqualieri.com. That's ANTHONYQUALIERI.com. StephanieSarkislieri.com. And my website, stephaniesarkis.com. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on Talking Brains. And we'll see you next episode. Thank you.